Hello and welcome to JAX 2016. We are here with one of our speakers. Mr. Faus, thank you for joining us and thank you for the wonderful keynote. I was wondering, is there any democracy in software development?
Wow, what a great question. Depending how you define democracy, I would say democracy is beginning to happen. Traditionally, a lot of times in the software development process, sometimes it can feel like it's a dictatorship. Traditional workflows from a software development lifecycle, one person ends up owning a task all the way from beginning to end. What we see with people who use products like GitHub and the open source development methodologies, that there's more and more collaboration that's taking place, and there's now a voting process for which features make it into which products. And there's still a sense of, just like in any democracy, where somebody can overrule and they can actually push through a change that maybe not everybody agrees with, but usually they are expected to give reasoning for why they're pushing something through. But I think for most purposes today, that there's a lot more collaboration and transparency that we actually see going on in the software development process.
So we are basically on the right path?
I believe we are on the right path. One of the things that was very interesting to me when I came to work at GitHub is there's actually a number of governments, state and local governments, that are actually using GitHub to actually define law. So what they'll do is they will actually use the Markdown wiki format, and they'll actually upload a law into GitHub. And then what they'll do is they will invite the constituents and actually allow them to come in and make comments on the law through a pull request process. And then they actually see the involvement of the community of people that this law is actually going to affect. And as we see people using GitHub in alternative methods, it's actually really exciting that we can point to those people who are not traditional software developers using the exact same process that we want to use for actually building quality software.
Interesting. Let's talk about a topic that's been used almost excessively recently, new Agile. Could you define that?
Sure. So the new Agile is more or less, it's pulling us back into making things developer-centric. Back in 2001, when the folks got together to create the first Agile manifesto, it was really meant as a methodology for developers, to let developers know that they are the ones at the center of the process. And it's imperative for them to make sure that what they're building is what the customer actually wants. So no matter if we try to define processes around it, if we build products that try to make it easier, what we find is that it's still the developer. And when you look at the traditional makeup of a development team, is you're going to have one project manager, but you may have 20, 30, 40 developers. So we need to make sure that the developers are using tooling and using communication mechanisms that they're most comfortable with using. And when we ask them to use tools that are outside their normal workflow, we don't get the results that we're expecting. And then what happens for the development teams is people feel like the developers aren't doing their jobs. So we're seeing a lot of people move from a more project management focused and a very strict, rigorous, I need to do things a certain way type mentality, to allowing developers to have more flexibility to experiment and try different things to make sure that they move the quality process more to the beginning of the process rather than us doing it at the end and then waiting for something in production to go wrong before we try to fix it.
Speaking of developers, could you maybe pinpoint the mindset of next-gen developers?
Sure. the mindset of the next-gen developer is it's going to be more social. People who are very open and transparent in their lives, which is very interesting when you look at things like Facebook and Twitter and how people follow other people and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. We're actually starting to see that in the software development community. And it's not knowing, where somebody's eating like we would do on Facebook. It's more about what projects, somebody that we respect, what are they working on? So when I see somebody like Rod Johnson, who was another keynote speaker here, when I go out and look at his GitHub profile and I can see the project that he's working on, I see him as a mentor and somebody that I look up to. So if he's doing things a certain way, then myself as a developer, I'm going to try to emulate that. And I'm going to try to follow in that person's footsteps. Their career progression and the things that they've done, if I want my career to follow the same type of path, I'm going to try to use that as a pattern for my own life. And then we look at that from a professional standpoint, but we also see kids today. And kids are now using iPads and iPhones and Samsung devices and using different operating systems and going to coding camps at a very early age. And these kids are going to grow up in a very technology savvy environment. And even with my own kids, I see their level of frustration when something just isn't easy. They're like, why isn't there an app for this? Why can't somebody just go ahead and make this easier for me? So going forward, I think those people are not looking for an easy way out, but I think what they're going to do is we're going to see them looking at the world in a different way, and they're going to want to have platforms for communication and for ways that they collaborate with other developers to be very easy for them to go find other projects, for them to go ahead and collaborate with other people, and to build the best software possible and to solve those problems that maybe 3, 5, 10 years ago when I would love to have the opportunity to have one of my kids build something and I can say, yeah, do you remember 10 years ago when you complained that nothing existed? And now here you are working for a company that I admire, and now you're now working for them and actually building that software today. So I think that's sort of what we're going to see is we're going to see kids that are playing games like Minecraft, where although it's a game, it's also a way of thinking about problems. I know one of the things that my youngest daughter, I remember the first time that it took her all weekend, and she created a building in Minecraft. And for those that don't know, in Minecraft, there's this thing called a creeper. And the creeper can go through and destroy things. And all of a sudden in her world, somebody came in and logged in and changed into a creeper and destroyed this building that took her all weekend to build. And she was in tears. And it was really funny because she knows just enough about computers that she came back to me and she was like, Dad, did we take a backup last night? I want to restore it back to the way that it was. And I told her, I said, no. And so then she went online and she started reading materials that she could use that are more or less creeper proof. So she became a problem solver. She had something that went wrong. She's very proud of the work that she did, but then somebody came along and destroyed it, and she then figured out a way to make it better. And she's constantly iterating on the work that she does. And as she goes forward, I hope that that mindset only continues, whether it's in software development or not.
So kids are not interested in money when they become inevitably next-gen developers. So what's their engine? What drives them to this?
Wow, what another great question. I actually get chills when I hear that, because I remember when I first started off in computers, one of the things that a lot of people came to me is they said, you could make a lot more money if you went into computers. And nowadays, money is important, but it's only important for them to be able to sustain a particular lifestyle. They're not looking for the extravagant multi-millionaire. what they want to know is they want to know that they've built software that maybe is used in Africa to be able to, for farmers to be able to figure out when the dry seasons and the wet seasons and what crops to use. Or maybe it's a doctor who's using software to be able to find a cure for some disease. And those developers want to know that they were involved in the process of actually building that software that's changing people's lives. And we see a lot of that in the US with, there's a lot of organizations like Girls at Code and Code for America and a lot of open data projects that what people are doing is they're realizing that people in nights and weekends when they're outside of their jobs, they're actually going out there and they're building software to make it easier for them in their day-to-day lives at work or at school or in their community. I see people going out and collaborating and building websites to be able to talk about community events that maybe you didn't know what was going on, building iPhone apps to talk about when different events are happening in your community. And those are things that are ways that they expand their horizons because they know when they're at work, they don't necessarily have the flexibility to be able to go off and try different things. So they use those other outlets for experimentation. And so one of the things that we get really excited at GitHub is when we see companies recognizing these people are going out and doing these things nights and weekends, and they go ahead and then they follow that culture and they bring it internally. And then they actually have a better development community internal, and people actually go there and they want to work there because they realize that that company wants to change the world the way that they would do if they weren't working at that company.
So I think we can sum up this last part in one word or just two maybe. My final question is, what is next-gen developers' superpower, their unique value, their...
Wow. I would probably say collaborative. That would be the one word that I think we're seeing of most of the next-gen developers is that social collaboration.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the interview and for the keynote. And it was great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.